for listening to Ding Dong Darkness Time Season 2 Stephen King Boogaloo. I gathered several of my most well-read friends together to discuss many of our favorite works by the master of the macabre himself. If you like what you hear, tell the world. In the meantime, let's talk some scary stories. Oh, and beware the spoilers, folks. They're a doozy. Hello, everybody. The time has come once again to gather round and welcome in the darkness. If this is your first time joining us, we're slowly tunneling our way through only a mere fraction of Stephen King's bibliography, and we've dug deep enough, we should probably think about asking a friend who can get things to procure for us a giant poster to help conceal our progress. Personally, I'd like an Idris Elba or maybe a Timothy Oliphant, but that's just me. If it isn't clear enough what I'm talking about, then please sit back and enjoy this discussion as my two co-hosts and I break down what I consider one of the finest works of literature, not only by Stephen King, but by anyone, and the movie that happens to be my favorite of all time, and that's Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption, or as the movie is known, The Shawshank Redemption. And by the way, our discussion will be dovetailing between both rather freely the movie and the book. We may even, like last week, start at the end and work our way back to the beginning. Who knows? It's anyone's guess. But with me tonight is the same splendid duo who joined me on last week's discussion of The Body / Stand By Me, Chris Armstrong and Kate Jenkins. But before we go any further, guys, I just want to ask both of you, who would you ask Red to smuggle into the prison for you?
Let me think about that for 1 second.
Take your time. I can always cut out the gaps.
I'm going to say, other than Idris Elba and Timothy Oliphant, because those are good choices, I like a young Isabella Rossellini.
Oh,
I'd say that would probably be my...
God, the one with her in the suit, like the man suit. Dear God. That is like, she is my icon. I want to be her. Okay, yeah, I love it. I'm hanging out in your cell. Okay. All right, Chris.
Sally.
I was going to say, if I wanted a badass woman, I would choose Lena Olin from like the Alias years where she was Mommy Bristow. She was...
Yes.
I don't know why I was so like enraptured by her. She just seemed like a very graceful but like kick-ass person. But if I have to go by another person, this is really tough. I mean, like Kate said, you made two great choices. How could you not go wrong with Tim or Idris? Oh shit, I don't know, guys.
It's hard, right?
I put you on the spot.
Is it supposed to be a crush? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, like who
here?
do you want a big fat poster of in your prison cell to just stare at? You know,
look at the poster for a while you're
right. This is a very important, like, think about Andy, that shot of him on the floor, like staring up at Rita Hayworth, like. That's you staring up at...
I'll say this might be an odd choice, but I'm going to stick to it because it's the first person who came to mind. First off, I'm very bad at answering questions out of the blue. My mind just goes, no knowledge for you. It just locks up and it's like everything you think you want to know behind this brick wall. You'll have to tunnel through it, much like Andy Dufresne did to get to it. So here's what I have. It's Manny Jacinto from The Good Place. Ooh. He plays a very goofball character, but I think he's a very refined looking guy and wouldn't mind taking a little look at him from time to time.
I think Kelly from Press Play and Scream would really appreciate your answer. She is a big Good Place fan.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she might even have that. My
second choice was Kristen Bell because
also a fantastic choice. You know what? We'll be in cells next to each other. I'll have Dax Shepard. How about that? We'll have.
Yes. Oh my God. I want Dax Shepard from the movie, the space movie that he did, Zathura, when he was an astronaut. I had such a crush on him from that movie. Dear God, he was such a cutie.
Of course, the joke is if you put Zach Braff and Dax Shepard next to each other, would anyone be able to recognize that it's different people?
Definitely.
They apparently still get confused when they're out in public. It's hilarious.
That's funny. That is really funny.
That's great.
I have to say there was a commercial with Zach Braff and who's the guy that he was in with Scrubs?
Oh, Donald Faison.
And like Donald Faison looks the same.
Locked in time. That guy. Yeah. It's impressive. Like, damn.
How lucky, right? If we could only be that way.
Yeah, my goodness.
I'm so glad we broke the ice with this discussion because I feel like the rest of it is going to be, well, I don't think it's going to get too dark per se here. A little bit. It will.
Let's just say the warden of this episode is going to say, grab your Bible and poster and make your way to your cell.
If only. I can't say I approve of this, but exceptions can be made. So, Shawshank Redemption. I, of course, as before with all the other episodes in this season, I like to get the brass tacks out of the way, and then we can kind of just come at this thing. As I said before, we are going to be talking a lot about the book and the movie kind of concurrently, and that's mostly because I feel like the movie probably has the strongest cultural pull or knowledge among most people, and that will explain why the movie bombed in the box office when it was released in 1994, and people hadn't heard of it. They didn't like the title. They didn't know what it was about. So it just showed that people didn't really know about this novella by King. But once it hit DVD the following year, it became a legend. So anyway, like The Body, Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption was published in the 1982 novella collection, Different Seasons. It's told from the point of view of Red, an inmate at Shawshank State Prison in Maine, who is doing a life stint for murder. He met a man named Andy Dufresne who came to Shawshank Prison after being convicted and sentenced to dual life sentences for shooting his wife and her lover to death. And Andy ended up changing the lives of nearly everyone he came in contact with during his decades there. And already the narrative device used in this story should feel pretty familiar. King has used it several times before, where the narrator is an observer telling the story of someone or something mythic in nature. But it's also common to a lot of folk tales and especially Bible stories. And I plan to circle back to that last one in a very big way later in the show, so bear with me here. Meanwhile, Shawshank does something a little different with that device, which is while Red is focused almost entirely on the story of Andy's time behind bars, we eventually come to find that the story isn't exactly about Andy himself. The redemption in the title is referring almost entirely to that of Red, but it's one of those things that you kind of have to think about when it's over because we're so focused on Andy's story and Andy's plight that Red almost feels like a background character or like he's just a voice, but he's so much more than that, which is really the beauty of this story. Now that I've gotten that out of the way, I do want to take a couple seconds to talk about the crime itself that Andy was convicted of and the legal proceedings because, well, we're all true crime enthusiasts here. And also, one of us has a law degree. It's not me or Chris.
I was going to say, not me. Who's left? Who's left?
So, I feel like I just kind of, sorry, Kate, we're just going to take advantage of that fact for a little bit.
Is it criminal law, Kate?
No, I was a family law lawyer. Although when you're doing a divorce case, every once in a while you run into a little criminal stuff. People get DUIs and restraining order violations. So
I will say Kate is a little more elevated in knowledge than, say, Chris and I as total lay people. We have never set foot in law school. We have no idea.
Objection, Your Honor. That's habeas corpus.
What? Excuse me, Your Honor. I have the body. That's what that
Counsel
means.
Is leading the witness.
Doesn't that mean I actually have the body? Like I have a body in the trunk, or maybe not the same thing. I committed a habeas corpus.
Do you have a body in the trunk? I wouldn't be shocked if you did, quite frankly.
No, you're not the first person who said that to me today.
If I had a nickel.
My reputation always precedes me.
I will say that as a family law lawyer, I was in court a lot, like 3 times a week, I would say. And you get really, really comfortable with the rules of evidence. And the rules of evidence between civil and criminal, and family is obviously civil and criminal is criminal. They're different. The rules of evidence are different. The standard of proof is different. So you're talking about preponderance versus beyond the shadow. But evidence is fascinating because it literally is the thing that will make or break a win or lose. Don't think it's the facts. Don't think it's your witnesses. It's the evidence, what you get in, what you keep out, and the way it's presented in both kinds of, in civil and criminal.
Right. And how you use whatever evidence you have to kind of build your story, and whatever,
Mhm.
whoever tells the better story wins, essentially, is what it seems like.
Yeah.
And in the case of Andy Dufresne, I mean, this to me is what I absolutely love about this story is King builds a murder case that seems very airtight. And in fact, we have Red saying in his own narration that if he'd been on Andy's jury, he would have voted guilty as well. Because, I mean, you have Andy admitting to buying a gun prior to the murder, a pistol, and he admitted to knowing his wife was having an affair. He
Yep.
admitted to being blackout drunk the night of the murder and even having followed them back to her lover's house and watching them go in. And then he
Out there
claims,
drinking.
yeah, he's out there drinking. The circumstances are laid bare. And a lot of times, is a lot of true crime people, podcasters and lawyers and whatnot will say circumstantial evidence is often your backbone of your case. It's a lot of people say, oh, DNA, oh, yada, yada, yada. No, it's really circumstantial evidence is not this flimsy thing that a lot of people think it is, right?
It
To me,
isn't.
such a strong, right. And so he claims to have thrown the gun in the Royal River, which is interesting because that ties into the body. Like the Royal
Yep.
River runs right through
A
different
lot of
seasons.
guns in the Royal River.
Yes, indeed. And he said he went back home. And so they never recovered the weapon. Meanwhile, despite all this, of course, Andy's wife and her lover are found riddled with bullets. And there's also an insurance policy incentive. At least it's mentioned in the movie. I don't know that that's brought up in the book.
I
But
don't
there
think it
are,
is in the
I
book.
don't think it is. Yeah. And there are other circumstances that just point this glaring neon arrow right at Andy as the murderer.
Andy's a banker, right? So you're like,
Yeah.
you would think, well, if anyone knows about this insurance, scam or whatever you want to call it, like, oh, I set out this policy, and then lo and behold, you would think a banker.
And what's really interesting is, yeah, you got the motive, you got the means, you got the opportunity. I mean, you got all three lined up here. But for me, of course, another thing King brings up is that Andy's demeanor kind of is the final nail in the coffin. But this is my one quibble. And this is something I think that comes from being an author who isn't a lawyer and you're a layperson and you're trying to just sell a specific drama. Andy probably would not have been on the stand testifying in his own defense. That's kind of my feeling. If he had even a semi-competent public defender, they wouldn't have had him anywhere near that stand.
You think
Um,
because of his demeanor, they wouldn't?
I think so, and I think definitely. I think they probably would have said, "No, dude, you look like a cold-blooded killer on that stand." And then King even describes him that way. He's chilly. But what do you think about that? What do you think about Andy being on the stand?
The first thing I think is that with all the true crime podcasts I listen to, if I was listening to an episode and they were presenting this evidence of, he knows she has a lover and he's bought a gun that matches the ballistics and he's sitting outside the house drinking, I think it would be almost a foregone conclusion that the podcast listeners and the podcast hosts would be saying, yeah, we all get it. It's the husband, it's the boyfriend, it's always.
It's always the husband. Yeah.
Yeah. And the difference between the movie and the book for me, in the book, King talks about his demeanor, his chilly demeanor. In the movie, you don't hear that until he starts to encounter Red and ask for the rock hammer, and Red's trying to figure him out. Like he's kind of keeps himself separate from the others, which I think there's a reason for that relates to what you were talking about Bible stories and some of the mysticism that's in this.
Yeah.
But I think his chilly demeanor, would I, as a lawyer, have put him on the stand? I think lawyers in any criminal case, whether you're talking about a murder or DUI, that's the question is, do you put your defendant on the stand? How are they going to come off and how are they going to relate? How's the jury going to relate to them? As we just saw play out amongst celebrities.
I don't know what you're talking about. I have never heard of such
no idea
in recent times. What?
But the problem that I think most criminal lawyers think is, if I don't put my playing on the stand, it's almost an admission of you're not going to hear from them. They're not going to tell you that they did not do it.
Right. And really, the absence of a murder weapon, they don't have anything else. They can't say the gun doesn't match. I actually love Andy's line
Yeah,
so much when he's like, considering the gun was never found, I find it decidedly inconvenient.
Here's my question though. Could Andy basically tell his lawyer, I don't care about your advice. I'm going on the stand.
absolutely.
And he could do that. So even if the lawyer's like, worst idea on earth, but he's like, listen, I'm going to defend myself and I have a story to tell. We don't know that either. So that could have been a case too, where
Andy might have definitely thought he could defend himself effectively.
which I feel like a lot of people probably would. If they didn't do it, they're going to be like, surely if I tell my story. And I don't think law is, I mean, they're not listening to the podcast in the 40s, right? They don't, we don't know all of these intricacies of that we know now just from pop culture and from everything that's in, entertainment and whatnot. And so you have to imagine there's a bit of that, but also it's storytelling. Ultimately what it comes down to, right? Like you don't want to watch a movie where he's sitting there silently. You want to hear him on the stand defending himself.
Right. And that's the thing. It's a plot convenience. It is a character building convenience.
Yeah.
It's something that you have to do in order to illustrate something about the character, which it sets that stage is Andy as this kind of distant, enigmatic guy. And also, I think too, King wanted us to think Andy was guilty.
Sure.
I mean, we're coming at this story, you and the three of us, but probably most people listening to this are coming to this knowing exactly how the story plays out. And we're benefiting a lot from hindsight. But when this story was fresh on the page and fresh on the screen, we did not know if Andy really did it or not. It was really like a total mystery until about halfway through. Yeah.
Do we know for sure he didn't do it? I guess that's my question, because part of the whole joke is not the joke, but the whole concept of this movie is like, Red's like, I'm the only guilty man in Shawshank. Like everyone else is like, I'm innocent, lawyer fucked me, all that kind of stuff. I guess with the Elmo Black story, we can assume, but I'm like, could that also be, are we making assumptions like the people on the jury made for his case? I don't know.
That's a question. I think the percentages change. Like at the beginning, you're like, maybe this guy really is guilty. And then over time you kind of I became more convinced that he probably was not, but I don't know that I was 100% sure. Later on, when you find out someone else had admitted.
And then when Andy, here's the thing though, Chris, I think we're both making a point. And I'm going to bring this a little bit up from the sort of back half of the story, that final discussion that Red and Andy have, definitely in the movie. In the book, I don't know that it is kind of the same, where Andy's sort of at his low point and he starts talking to Red about Zihuatanejo, and he says, I killed my wife. I didn't pull the trigger, but I drove her away and she died because of me. Is in a way, Andy is not a completely innocent party in the sense of he was a bad husband, and we don't know what kind of husband he was. He was probably a prick. He was, if Andy was anything like
Andy was
to his wife, the way that he came off really through most of this story, I would imagine he'd be a very hard man to be married to.
I mean, this is the guy who goes up to the most evil, what they call him, evil screw of a prison guard to try to get him more money, and does it in the worst way possible, which is, do you trust your wife? That is the absolute worst way to ask this monster of a human the question you want to get to. And I thought surely this was a movie conceit. It'll be different in the novella. Exact same.
Yeah,
exactly.
Exact same. I was like, oh my God, he just can't help himself.
Yeah, Andy's a cold fish, I think was a word used to describe him. Yeah.
he can shut it down to get what he wants. He, in the movie, and in the book, he has him right up on the edge of the roof there, and you think he's going to go over.
Yeah.
But yeah. Andy obviously has it thought out 3 steps ahead. He's a chess player.
Very, very much so. Do you feel, if the last question I have on sort of the true crime angle that I'm taking with this show right now?
Wait, we have to tell everyone our joke, which is you did the intro so perfectly, Kate. You're getting
Oh,
a call from Mansfield Prison or
Yeah.
Shawshank
Shawshank
Prison
Prison.
from
This
Andy
is a collect
Dufresne.
call from Ohio
Serial,
State
episode
Prison.
4.
Yeah,
From
yeah.
that was my serial. That was my serial
That
reference,
was your
like all
serial,
the
yeah.
time
I
throughout
think
series.
honestly it'd be so great in a real life court setting or in a real life setting. Do you think Andy would have likely been convicted? And do you also believe that there are any grounds that something like the Innocence Project would have had any success or an appeal could have overturned? They could even say, like, they could argue on appeal, which it wouldn't probably work given what I know of appeals nowadays, is they could say his lawyer was incompetent for letting him or for allowing him or not advising him to get on the stand, or they could
Always.
say that, right? It wouldn't make any difference, but I feel like his conviction would probably be upheld even in absence of the murder weapon because of all the circumstantial evidence, right?
I would take that bet any day. Like, I would take that appeal. So the first thing on any criminal appeal is ineffective assistance of counsel,
Hmm.
always. And counsel number one is just knowingly the sacrificial lamb. Like, you're going to say that I sucked, and that's fine because that's what you need to get to the appeal. I would take the appeal because I think you could force at an appellate level where you're outside of a jury's purview, you could probably force those evidentiary things. You have nothing.
Yeah, there is no physical evidence.
You have no evidence whatsoever. You have motive, you have opportunity, but you don't really have anything beyond that.
Right.
Um, and then you would just have to drop in
Hmm.
like a suggestion that it's possible that there was somebody else.
Yeah.
So defense counsel just needs to start looking, are there any other home invasions? Are there any other rapes or murders in the
Hmm.
nearby area? It's just doubt. That's all that you need to drop in.
And then you have something like, Tommy, who comes in later as this witness, which is kind of hard because he's a jailhouse witness.
Yep.
He's got credibility problems. That's where probably an Innocence Project kind of situation could come in, investigate, or any kind of PI could investigate and find, like he said in the movie, W-2s, former addresses, all
Mhm.
this stuff. Yeah.
Allison, you're being obtuse. I don't really just.
Yeah, I love that. That honestly, true confession here, my that was my first encounter with the word obtuse used to
Sure.
describe a person. I'd never heard that before
It's usually
until
triangles, right?
yeah, yeah. I was like a junior in high school when I saw this movie, or yeah, or sophomore in high school when I saw this movie. So yeah, at that point I was only involved in geometry. So that was my context for
And I
that.
have to say, one other interesting thing I was reading and doing some just kind of background research on the on this show is that apparently forensic ballistics did exist in the 40s. I don't know
Hmm.
to what extent or how readily available it was, but the whole idea is like if Andy just held on to that gun and didn't throw it
Yeah.
away, they might have been able to prove the bullets that killed his wife and her lover
He would have been
did not
instantly
come
rolled out. He would have been
yeah,
rolled
like did
out.
not come from his gun. So in some ways, his doing that almost sealed his fate, which I was like, oh man, that's like another, it's never discussed, but what a knife.
They maybe might have tried to still press a case like maybe he had another gun. I would feel like they would be desperate enough, but I feel like if they couldn't prove that he had another gun, or
Right.
it's such a tough case, right?
So fingerprints were around at that point too,
True.
right?
Yes. Yes.
So doorway, any other surfaces. I don't know
True.
where were the wife
Bullet casings. You would think
bullet
who loaded
casing?
the friggin' gun, right? Well, fingerprints are kind of iffy because they don't always stick to things, and I feel like fingerprints are another one of those Hollywood things that when you get into the nitty gritty of fingerprints, but those have been pulled off of bullet casings in real life
Right,
murder cases.
right.
So, but if say somebody has dry hands or something, then maybe not. So, I love talking about this case though in the true crime angle because I do feel like it shows in many ways the veracity of really the whole thing that started this whole story of what got Andy in prison. I definitely admire King's ability to put together something like this in a way that it would be impossible, especially by the standards of 1947, which is when he was sent away, to be overturned, that there would be anything that could absolve him. If this happened now, I think we could probably find other exculpatory evidence.
Could get microbial DNA and like do it, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah, they might even be able to go like, okay, but what's also messed up is, of course, they could prove his car was there because the tire tracks were
Mhm.
there, and there was all these other the proof. If he hadn't gone to his house, what's also really messed up is that the sort of perfect storm of bad luck that happens that the night that you're there thinking about murdering your wife and her
Uh-huh.
lover and you're drunk off your ass, you go home, it's a goddamn home invader that comes in and does it.
Yeah.
Like that to me is just
But that's why I say, can we fully trust Andy and Tommy? Are they reliable? I don't know. Like, I want to believe them, but I guess as we're sitting here talking about it, it just entered my brain of like, we assume he's innocent, but do we actually know? He's such a cold, calculated person. I don't know.
I feel like he is. I do feel like it's one of those things of where your demeanor and your actions can portray you in a certain way that can really fuck your life up if you are in the wrong circumstance. You know what I mean? So a guy like Andy,
He was perfectly happy to embezzle money and commit fraud to open a library.
I mean, you're in
What else
prison.
is this guy capable
It's
of?
well, see that also, I'm glad that you brought that up too, because that's another kind of rabbit hole subject right there of what happens in so many instances when people go to prison, especially if they're guilty of lower level crimes, that's where they go to learn how to be a criminal.
That's what Andy said. I'm an innocent man. I had to go to Shawshank to be a criminal.
And
No?
that's so in so many cases, right? Like drug people who are put in prison for drug offenses, they go in prison, they become even harder drug addicts.
Oh, and masters of whatever the thing is, because they go and learn from those people.
You're in crime college. I mean, that's basically that's what prison is. So, but definitely Andy has a streak of Machiavellianism without a doubt. I mean, he's a banker. So I
Yeah.
think that's again plays into that you already have this whole cold streak of I think high level bankers like
Yeah.
he wasn't a pediatrician for crying out
Right.
loud, you know.
Not a
Uh,
veterinarian.
yeah. At least unless you're the vet from Better Call Saul.
Yeah. Right.
It's like,
Oh, that's a
uh,
great true crime show.
oh,
That's true.
it really is.
Do you guys remember the case where, and I cannot think of the name right now, but the father was like out playing basketball. His wife and his two kids are murdered. And he used to work for the police department or the sheriff's department. He comes home, finds them like murdered. The kids are in the car, and everyone is convinced he's got DNA evidence on his clothing because he's picked up and held the children. And like the everything, all of the facts are this guy did it. This guy
Yeah.
did it. He did it. He did it. And it ultimately turns out that it very clearly was someone else, actually an escaped convict
Oh my
who
gosh.
did the murder. But this guy went to jail and years and years and years and years of appeals and attempts to resolve it. And this is a straight white male who
Yeah.
used to be a police officer who had friends in law enforcement. So when you're talking about like all the bad luck that can exist, that's what this guy experienced, and it took forever.
I remember that case. I cannot remember
Yeah, I
the name,
cannot
and I don't
remember
remember
right
what
now.
podcast I heard it on, but I definitely heard that. Did True Crime Garage do this?
I'm sure.
Man.
Yeah.
Okay.
By the way,
Anyway.
shout out to True Crime Garage. Love, forever love, which you
Yes.
turned me on to, Allison.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I love it.
It's one of those shows that that those guys in oh God, Going West, that's another one they do such a great job. They're a lot like True Crime Garage.
Heath and Dabney.
Yes. Oh my God, they're so great. But the elements of this case really seem at least solid enough, especially by the standards of American justice in many ways, especially back then. So
Yeah.
at this point, when Andy enters in, his fate is very well sealed, and we really don't know what the appeals process is like, or if there is one, or what the case is in Maine, what the laws are in Maine. King doesn't get into those things. He only has
Yeah.
like parole. Like the book gets into the parole aspect of things a little bit, but
Heartbreakingly with Brooks, one of the other
oh,
characters.
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Oh, God. Yeah, yeah,
mm.
Brooks is a interesting character. We'll go ahead and get into Brooks because I feel like we're already leading into sort of the existential element of this story, which is Andy comes in and he has a different air about him. He's new, obviously, to prison. He's never broken a crime in his life that we know of. But he's new to this. Everybody that he meets along the way is a quote unquote institutional man. And you'll hear that word a lot,
Yeah.
institutionalized, institution. And that sense of these are convicts. They've been in for decades for hard crimes. This is the sort of prison that houses these sorts of inmates, right? The violent crime. You could assume most of the people in this prison are convicted of murder or
Hmm.
just high level felonies. So Red fully admits and describes in the book, he describes his crime. He fixed the brakes, quote unquote, fixed the brakes on someone's car and killed everyone in it. And
Wasn't it his wife's car?
it was his wife. And I think somebody else was in the car with her, if I'm not mistaken. I
I
think
think
we're,
three people ended up dying from what he did. I can't remember if they were all in the car or the car hit people because of what he had done. Yeah. Like I think a child too, wasn't there?
yeah.
And you don't get that. We don't know the nature of the murder. He never says it in the movie.
No, it's never brought up.
Why don't we dislike Red? We know that he did this terrible thing. Like maybe we like Andy because we believe that he's probably innocent and has been wrongly convicted. Why do we love Red?
Is it the benefit of the doubt because he's the narrator and we
Maybe.
automatically identify? I mean, obviously in the movie it's Morgan Freeman, so you're like, it's Morgan. But in the book, to me, it's that he's the person who has the benefit of looking back and retelling the full story. And I don't know, there's something about that where you automatically put trust in the narrator.
So I will say this in my college days when I was aspiring to be a forensic psychologist, and I was working very closely with my psychology professor at the time, and he was the chief psychologist at McNeil Island Penitentiary in Washington State. He took our class on tours of the prison.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the last remaining island prison in the United States at the time. It is no longer open, I
Yeah, there's
believe.
something about that.
Yeah, that was a fascinating trip. And we got to sit down and talk to several of the inmates, like one on one, or the class. Like they would bring them into a room and we would have a conversation about them. And you could tell the ones that were being very diversionary in their language. They were speaking in very passive voice, or they wouldn't put themselves in their crime, right? They had a distance between it, almost as a way of shying away. But there was one or two that were very honest about what they did. And they were also very obviously remorseful about it, but they didn't shy away from it. They didn't use language to cover their asses. They were very forthright about, I killed a person.
Yeah.
This is what I did. And there's something about that that garners a lot of respect, even though you know what they did. And at the same time, they're very likable people on a base level. If I didn't know that this person was a murderer, I would enjoy sitting and talking and having a beer with them and never knowing or whatever. So there's like an element of honesty and charisma that come into play. And so why do I root for Red? Why do I like Red? I think it's because he doesn't hide what he did. He even in the movie, we don't know his crime, but he says only guilty man in Shawshank. He knows exactly what he did, and he has a clear element of like, and I hate myself for it. I think there's something about that. Like if Red was anything less than honest about his own guilt, he would be shady and we wouldn't be rooting for him in the same way. So
As the narrator, like Chris said, there's so much chaos going on around all of the events. There's the fraud, there's the embezzlement, there's the abuse by the guards, there's the relationships of the inmates. And Red is like he's a sane voice. Like he is a reliable narrator. He doesn't lie. He doesn't hide things. And so you're right when you say that the title redemption, it's as much or more about Red's redemption than it is about Andy's, because I don't even know how Andy necessarily feels about, probably doesn't feel like he needs to be redeemed because
Yeah.
he believes, he knows he didn't do this crime. He's somehow still able to like bide his time, a 2 decades worth of time.
Where you have someone like Red who's been sitting in prison for 20 years by the time Andy gets there, and by the time
Yeah.
Andy busts out. In the book, they add it's an additional 10 years. In the movie, it's shortened to 19. In the book, it's like 27 years that Andy's in. And by that point, Red has been in for almost 50 years, almost as long as Brooks was. I mean, he was 40
Right.
years in the book, so we can assume almost 50 years in,
Yeah.
oh, I'm sorry, 40 years in the movie, so maybe 50 years in the book. So by that point, especially, it's like, okay, how long is long enough? That is a question that comes up regularly in this story. And who decides that, and what purpose is that serving? Bart, the guy that I just mentioned, the psychologist friend of mine, we've had this discussion numerous times of like, why do you think someone needs to be in prison for, say, 60 years for such and such thing? What's the basis of that? It's pure emotion is what it is. It's what because we want to punish someone for as long and as hard as we can.
Yeah. Pure punishment.
Why is that exactly? The story touches on this a lot. It's like they put you away for life, and that's exactly what they take away from you. They let you
Mhm.
out
Mhm.
when you're used up and you got a few marbles rolling around in your head, and you are basically useless to society, even if you're not quote unquote
Institutionalized.
yeah.
That's what they say, right? Like
Yeah.
that's how Brooks couldn't make it on the outside. He was basically his entire life at Shawshank. It's a little more understated in the novella,
Hmm.
but the voiceover and just the montage that when Brooks writes that letter,
Yeah.
Ugh.
heart wrenching. I don't care how many times I've seen that movie. It is a gut punch every single time. You know, he's like, I go to the park to feed the birds. I think Jake will show up, but he never
Yeah.
does. Like, that's just like that bird was like the one friend on the outside he thought he could maybe get a chance to see.
BDC.
It's awful. And it's just so
One thing
sad.
I love about what Darabont did in the adaptation of this is that there was a bird named Jake in the book. It was another inmate that had him, and he was the one who was in for a long time. He raised Jake from a little baby birdie and then set him free from the plate shop before he got out, and then they found Jake dead right nearby, like after this inmate left.
That was apparently filmed and it's a deleted scene.
Oh,
So
okay.
they actually
Yeah.
filmed that after Brooks left, they found him like, yeah, in the prison yard.
Because that kind of, the bird himself was also institutionalized in his
Yeah.
own way, which a lot of animals are when we take them in. I mean, even our own, like my cat would not survive, you know, without us. So this whole idea, and I love that Frank saw the need to make Brooks into what he was in the movie, because you need this visual representation of the institutionalization of these inmates. And he also represents this sort of like this invisible prison that we need to escape. It's not just the walls, it's in your mind. When you leave, he's so afraid all the time. That's all you hear. And even Red, brings that up much later too. I'm just tired of being afraid all the
Tired of being
time.
afraid all the time. That line really struck me because the sadness for me about Brooks is in prison, he was somebody. He was the librarian. He
Hmm.
had these relations based on that. He had some control, some freedoms. On the outside, he's just a grocery bagger that has a crappy boss,
The whole idea of someone who is been in prison this long, it makes you wonder, like, it's almost crueler to let him out than you think. You're giving somebody their freedom, but freedom is one of those things that when you aren't trained to use it properly, you don't know what to do with it. It's kind of more of a burden than it is a gift. And so this idea of like, hey, congratulations, it's almost like you just hand someone this really advanced tool that they've never seen before, and expect them to just build an airplane with it. And
a whole lot of decisions that they didn't have to make.
it's like that final dehumanizing
Yeah.
cherry on a shit sundae. It's like
Yeah.
we've gone ahead and we've kept you in these walls for 50 some years, and now here you go. And in real life America right now in 2022, you have people being let out of prison with no more than like a $40 check, and they're not even allowed to leave
Yeah.
the jurisdiction in which they were arrested. So a lot of times they are being sent back to
For
nothing.
what?
They have not even the benefit always of a halfway house.
Right.
They're almost
Or
certainly going to
family or
do.
support.
Yeah, and so when Brooks talks about maybe I ought to, get a gun and rob the foodway, and maybe I'll shoot the manager for an extra, I mean, it's funny, but at the same time, that's exactly what happens.
Oh, recidivism with stuff like that is amazing. I mean, there's a point, amount of time that you spend in prison that once you're past that point, recidivism rate or the reoffense rate goes up so high for that reason. At
Mm-hmm.
least there's a place to sleep, there's food to eat, there's people around. And maybe if you're lucky, you have some role. You're the guy who gets things, or you're the librarian, or you're the guy who helps the warden defraud, whatever.
So the whole thing is built on rehabilitation, but it's like, what are the mechanisms by which you're rehabilitated? You're sitting in this pocket universe with your thoughts that don't operate in the real span of time, and then somehow you're going to leave this alternate dimension, go into the real world, and be fully integrated and a member of society who is productive because you are seen as part of society. How does that even happen?
And good luck finding a job, right? And you put convicted felon on your job application.
And you're 7 years old.
Yes, and you're being released as an old person. It is hard enough for a non-convicted 50-year-old person to find a job, let alone one freshly out of prison.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And if they don't have good family, or if they don't have a good stable situation to return to, yeah, they're right back in, and it's a revolving door, and it's all part of that whole system. And I feel like King explains this in such a beautiful way, and demonstrates it. There will be people that will argue some of the veracity of what happens inside prison, but I feel that some of those creative liberties can be taken, but overall, the description of the prison system and how it works and what it does to people, when Red says these walls are funny, they are. First you hate them, and then you come to depend on them. And that is the damn truth.
Have you guys
Um,
ever listened to the podcast Ear Hustle?
no.
So it's a podcast made by two people. Erlon Woods is the one of the hosts who was in San Quentin for many, many years. In fact, when they started the podcast, he was still an inmate. He's out now.
Oh, wow.
And then the woman that he does the podcast with, she had a grant to come and work with inmates. And it's prison stories. And it is amazing. Like it's so amazing because it really talks about the way that prison changes you, especially long time, and how it can institutionalize you. And I think it's like in the third season when he knows he's going to be paroled, and he's scared out of his mind. Like he talks about it. He's like, I'm going back to the same area in California where I came from.
Right.
Got family and friends. Are they going to accept me? Are they going to reject me? Some of both. What am I going to do? How am I going to be able to stay clean? And he's probably, I want to say 40 at the time that he gets released. He's not like Brooks or Red ultimately, who are much older. It's a fascinating podcast that looks at what the walls are funny.
I would love to get in touch with them possibly because I'm doing a season on prison, and I'd really love to talk.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Nigel Poor is the woman's name that he does it with. Erlon Woods and Nigel Poor.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. God, I could expound on this honestly for hours and hours and hours, but I feel like King reveals so much of his own internal values with the way he tells this story. And I feel like, sometimes a writer will open themselves up to show some of the deepest, blackest parts of their psyche, like he did, say, in Pet Sematary, which, last week we talked about. I'm sorry, the week before last, when we talked in the Pet Sematary episode, James D.F. Hanna and I, about how King almost didn't like where he went in that story because there was too much nihilism involved, and it didn't reflect how he tends to see the world. Whereas in Shawshank, you see it's honestly an absolute other side of the coin of King's values, and it's the main reason I personally relate so much to him as an author because, amid all the horror that he describes in so many of his stories, is this vivid sense of humanity and the good it can encompass. And I feel like that's also why this story is so popular among the mainstream and why it was such a huge hit once it was released on DVD and people started giving it a chance and they sat and watched this thing. They were completely blown away by it. It is still the number one rated film of all time on IMDb. Number one over The Godfather, which is number two. It's a 9.3 out of 10. And I feel it's like that because, on the one hand, it appeals, I think, in some ways on the spiritual level. Also, I feel it has a lot of Christian allegory.
Yeah.
And I'll get into that a little bit because that for me is one of the more interesting elements. And I don't think we have to dig too far to see these things.
Yeah. It's an aspect of King too, and it floats around in a lot of his books, actually, both for good and bad.
Right, right. Well, we have the warden that's more highlighted in because we only have one warden in the Darabont film through the whole thing, whereas in the novella we have like three or four wardens, and he's the final one that comes. Yeah, Norton is the one in the movie, and he's the last warden.
Yeah.
He's the hardcore Christian hypocrite.
And narratively, you just need one warden. You need the one who carries it through for the movie. Like, it makes sense for the novella. You show the passage of years with these different wardens, but this one, it's like you need the tough monster who hides behind the veil of pious Christianity, who you realize it's all storefront, right?
You need your icons. You need your warden, and you need Byron Hadley.
Yeah.
The bad guy. Those are your bad guys right
Ooh,
there.
that actor is such
Clancy Brown.
He is amazingly scary.
He is not only Mr. Krabs from SpongeBob, guys.
Yeah.
I almost want to tell any kid that loves SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs, like, I'm going to show you this movie called Shawshank Redemption, where he, calls someone a maggot dick motherfucker,
or butt steak.
But
he has some of the best insults. They're so off the wall.
He really does.
That could be an insult or a compliment. You never know.
But, back to the Christian allegory aspects, I wrote a couple of things down to point some of this out. Like, we have an innocent man being convicted of a crime. I mean, that is very much a, Jesus allegory right there. Mm-hmm. And then we have, during his incarceration, he befriends prisoners, reforms the prison from within, of course, by building the library, helping many of the prisoners get their high school diplomas.
Yeah.
And then in the movie, which honestly is one that always gives me goosebumps even when I think about it, the Madame Butterfly scene where he's playing the opera and people are looking up at it. They're in the prison yard, and that crane shot of all of them looking up and this music playing. And then my second favorite shot is you got the warden knocking on the door saying, "Let me in here." And Andy leans forward, and the iciness in his eyes, that defiant look when he turns up that volume.
And apparently Tim Robbins ad-libbed that. That wasn't in the script.
Oh, really?
He added that. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't
That's
know that.
amazing.
Isn't that great?
Oh, God, it's just beautiful.
Well, and the other thing is Andy is willing to take his hit, right? Like, he's willing to be pushed to the edge of the roof to get the guys beers or to make them feel like a human for a minute. He's willing to get put in solitary to let them hear the opera. He's Jesus-like in that way.
He wants them to feel that grace of freedom and hope. And that's part of the reason I feel like he's a cold fish on the outside, but there's more to him. And I think that's part of the enigma of him. And also it serves to demonstrate that buffer between Red and Andy, because Red can't be in Andy's head. He's only showing what he can see, right? But we see these actions that Andy is doing. And there's also him, of course, allying with the guards and finding ways to ally himself with the powers that be so he can help those around him. And it, like I said, there's that Machiavellian aspect, but it's also like, it's white collar crime. I guess I just don't look at it quite the same way. It's like, okay, but you're using a lot of that money and a lot of that other money that he got for the library was stuff that was from his own work. He wrote the government multiple times. Like he was the bug, the
For
gnat
six
in their
years.
ear for 6 years. He wrote
Yeah.
and got that money. So that was perfectly legal appropriated funding from the state of Maine that he got that library built. But he did it through currying favor. It's like he knew how to make the right moves with the right
Mhm.
people to get the warden to say to him, "You go ahead and write your letters. I'll even mail them for you."
Because he doesn't believe that Andy as the rebel, which if you think of Jesus as a rebel, he
Hmm.
doesn't believe that Andy can accomplish anything. Yeah, I'll send your letters for you. They're not going anywhere.
As Jesus does, and he ends up exposing the corruption, right? And so, and standing up to it in a way, when Andy finally sees that he has this chance for getting a new trial and all this stuff with Tommy comes out,
Right.
and then he ends up confronting him and saying, "I'm not doing it anymore." And then, of course, the warden threatens him, casts him down
Yeah.
in the hole for 2 months. We'll talk a little bit here as we get to it more in the chronology of the story, as if we're kind of following that. This is more like a nebulous discussion.
That
As
ship has
per
sailed, I
usual.
think. Chronology at this point? Come on.
When, of course, Andy ends up pulling his big surprise at the end, and in the movie especially, a tool of misdirection is used when we think, again, put yourself in the shoes of someone who's seeing this movie for the first time and isn't
Right.
aware of the plot in any way. Spoiler alert, he does escape, right? He's been planning his escape from prison for a very long time.
Since the movie.
He's been tunneling through that wall behind those Rita Hayworth posters and the Raquel Welch and Linda Ronstadt was mentioned in the book. That's not in the movie. At the same time, in the movie, we think Andy is killing him, getting ready to kill himself. He is asked for a length of rope. And of course, I love, by the way, the movie, the other inmates, the Haywood and all these guys, that are like
Not in
part,
the book at all.
not in the
All of
book.
those friends, except for Tommy, none of them, and
No.
Red, of course, none of them are in the book. It really kind of rounds out the idea of this lived in feeling. You don't get a lot of those insights in the novella. It's more this story. You don't get kind of the day to day life
Mhm.
stuff. It's more broad brush, but you need it for the movie. And so, yeah, you have this pretty extensive friend group, even though they don't get a lot to do, there's all
Yeah.
kind of there.
They have
I
their own
think
little
Interesting.
dialogue. They have their
They've got their
lunch
own little
and
bits. Yeah.
I wonder if that's the reality. That I mean, it has to be that relationships form and exist and change and
well, there's
you
a
know,
whole pecking order, right? And I
yeah.
and I feel like,
Yes.
we get a little bit of that with Andy in the very beginning of the novella. Andy's already getting targeted by the sisters,
Mhm.
the rapists that are beating him and assaulting him. It pretty much when Andy first approaches Red in the yard in the book, he's already got a black eye. He's already been,
Yeah.
handled, he's already dealing with this. So
Which makes the Rockhammer request all the more suspicious, right?
yes, yes, I actually really liked that. The movie does alter the chronology a tiny bit to sort
Yeah.
of give it a little more focus. And of course, like when Andy gets beat to within an inch of his life, and the whole thing with like, you broke Rooster's nose, you're gonna swallow what I give you to swallow. That whole scene,
Anything you put in my mouth,
you're gonna
You're going to
lose.
you're gonna
lose.
lose.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And that just shows again, Andy is kind of a badass. Like he doesn't
Yeah.
care. That cold streak, that coolness that he has is what serves him so well.
But he wins by his intellect and intelligence. Always. He does it against the warden. He does it against Boggs. Like he even wins over the other group members kind of with just because again, he's the cold fish, but his intellect and his abilities, I guess you might say, are what kind of win him over, even though they didn't serve him well in his trial. They're at least serving him well here.
That goes back to the messianic talk about him being separate, him being different
Yes.
than the
Yes.
others. But it's such an interesting choice on King's part. I think he's not warm. He's not someone that you see as a typical hero, although he does these heroic things. So if you contrast that with King's other prison novel, or novels, which I also adore, which is The Green Mile.
Absolutely.
I
Oh
mean, you have
God.
an even clearer messianic, like a fully openly stated. And
Hmm.
that character, John Coffey, is incredibly warm. I mean, he's a raw nerve. He's wide open to people and what is going on.
He is King's take on Of Mice and Men.
Yes.
And again plays with the what you expect versus what happened. He again creates another crime that looks almost like, well, of course he did it.
Mhm.
But yeah, you're right. The messianic thing is, I think, a regular trope. And of course, the one that really brings it home here is, of course, when Andy makes his escape, they go and they find his cell empty, which is like the empty tomb
Yeah.
after, the
Yeah.
crucifixion, right? Because at that point, you're thinking Andy's at his worst point. And, so yeah, he's brought the lowest he's been brought, and then he's gone. And then, of course, we see this whole rebirth. It's the whole escape is a symbol of rebirth from going down that long, narrow, dark, dank tube. Obviously, not full of shit. Hopefully, when you're when you're being born,
Hopefully not.
like that scene, by the way, in the film is depicted pitch perfect.
Yeah.
Everything from when he's busting open the pipe with the rock with to the timing of the thunder strikes, and then he's
Yeah.
going through the tunnel, squeezing through that tunnel.
It is amazing. The one thing I will say, can movies stop making lightning and thunder happen at the exact same time? It doesn't happen. Stop
think-
No, you
doing
can't.
it.
Well, here's the beautiful thing.
And lightning doesn't go. It was very cheesy lightning thunder.
The reason it's like that, though, is because, again, this is from inside Red's head, and he's just, at this point, this is how he's thinking it happens. So,
You're making a little bit of a leap there. This is every movie. Lightning and thunder
well,
happen.
sure. I'm just talking about in this instance. It's going to be amplified to a more fantastical level, specifically because of the way the story is being told.
True. One thing I will say that is in the novella, but it's not really mentioned when he crawls through the 5 football field length of river of shit. Red just sort of theorizes, what would Andy have thought if he got to the end of that tunnel and there was a gate there? It was welded shut, or it narrowed to a point he couldn't fit through.
Yeah.
And that's such a terrifying thought that's never explored in the movie. The idea that you're going to crawl this far, you can't crawl back.
No.
He can't there's no way back. This is a point of no return pretty much once he climbs in there. That is a very haunting realization. When Red says that, like, I got chills.
Red brings up a lot of those points, actually. Not just that. He talks about, like, what if he got paroled after all when this tunnel was in the wall? What if the whole pipe got discovered, or what if they ended up connecting that pipe to the water treatment plant, because that was like the one unit that hadn't been yet. And then he talks about like the money and identity that he had buried in under that rock in the field for all those years. And one thing I like too is the book set up, the whole separate identity was set up by a friend that Andy had on the outside.
And it was before he went in, right? Didn't he set it up?
He made all these plans before he went in, which I thought was more interesting in its own way. That guy, that friend on the outside, died, so Red talks about what if a parking lot was built where that wall is under 10 feet of concrete.
The whole thing is just the land of ifs, right?
Yeah, that could drive you insane.
Yes. And we've all had, I think, life events where you think, if this had happened differently, or if I had done this or hadn't done this, what would it have been?
Yeah, because it really is so many factors. If one little thing went wrong.
Well, and even to reverse back and go to the Christian element, he has this little rock hammer inside the Bible that in the movie the warden picks up and is holding when they're searching his cell.
And back to him.
And you don't know the first time you see it, of course. And then there's the whole thing, salvation lies within. He hands it back to the warden. And that's his little mic drop when he does the switch and the warden opens the safe and he says, you're right, salvation does lie within.
And the hammer is in the book of Exodus.
The book of Exodus. So it's like, that to me is the most poetic justice aspect of this entire story. That's a huge what if, right? All that warden had to do is like thumb open to his favorite passage, find that rock hammer, he's done.
And you're talking about, 20 years, that flat out disturbed me. The idea of just picking with the rock hammer for that long and making this much progress every night because you can only do it for a little while. You don't want people to hear you.
This is one of my favorite elements of the book that is kind of very offhand mentioned because in the movie, Andy keeps his little one person cell the entire time, but in the book, he ends up with a cellmate for like
That's
nine
right.
months.
And he
And
has to stop.
he has to stop digging, and the guy that he shared the cell with felt a draft.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
Andy wouldn't let him touch any of his stuff. And he just the room was always really cold. And so Red looks back on that is like, oh, so that was going on back when he had the cellmate for 9 months. He would have been gone even sooner than that, and maybe would have bought him another year if they hadn't had that one cellmate during that one warden transition or whatever. So there were so many things that could have haunted anybody, but also he had gotten to the point where he couldn't back out. He was stuck. And we don't know. It's not revealed really in the movie. It's still treated as a guess on Red's part how Andy even discovered this. In the movie, they make it look like Andy was going to try to carve his name in the wall with the end of the rock hammer and a chunk of the concrete fell out. That was like his best guess, but we still don't know what caused Andy to start digging in the first place.
Doesn't Andy say that he hadn't really thought about it until he asked for the rock hammer from Red, and Red was like, well, yeah, I guess it would take you 100 million years to dig with this little hammer through
Yeah.
the wall. And that gave him the idea, just the patience
Yeah.
involved and all the what ifs. So the subtitle to the story is Hope Springs Eternal. And you have to believe that the whole time he's like, I just have to hope. I just have to hope that the what ifs aren't going to get me and that I'm going to get to the outside, even though it's been 20 years and I'm 55 years old. And you know what I mean? It's just, it's hope.
And I think in the novella, doesn't he Red surmises that maybe Andy got a hold of some blueprints of the
Yes.
prison, like
Yeah.
when he's in the warden's office or something. But you're right. He never quite knows. We do see that scene. What's interesting to me is in the novella, his first request is for a Rita Hayworth poster.
Yes.
And then over the years replaces them. In the movie, he asks Red to smuggle in Rita Hayworth when they're watching one of her movies.
Yeah.
And he's like, give me a couple weeks. And then he gets the poster. So it makes me wonder, was this, to your Machiavellian point, Allison, did he ask for Rita Hayworth knowing Red would like think to get a poster? Was he like playing that second layer of chess? Or did he make it as a comment? Red sends him a poster and then he has the realization, like where in the time frame is he carving and getting the poster? We don't know.
You're absolutely right, because in the book, they talk about how Andy came to him and he was like super excited and like very high strung, like something was eating at him. But in the movie, he looks like he's having a good time at the movie. You don't really get the sense.
Yeah.
Again, we're trying to like almost apply hindsight to it, but if you're trying to watch it through the eyes of someone who's never seen it before, you're looking at Tim Robbins in that scene. He just looks like he's having a nice time. He doesn't look super excitable or anxious or anything
And it's
like
almost
that.
just a joke, like, hey, I hear you get things, that people want. He's like, I've been known to locate items from time to time. Let me read a Hayworth. It's almost like a joking conversation between friends.
Don't forget that between the time Andy asks for Rita Hayworth or the poster and the time that it comes in, is when he has the worst encounter with the sisters.
That's right.
And he's in the infirmary for like a month.
You have to wonder too, at what point did Andy really break through between, like, how long did it take him to actually break through and actually make the decision to go? Because I feel like there had to have been, and I think it might have been the novella that touched on this, is Andy dealing with his own sense of institutionalization and making that decision to do it, because that's an element as well.
Yeah. And there's that great line that Red says in the novella where he's like, I imagine Andy stared at that poster and imagined that he could crawl into it and get out of here.
Yeah.
Like, so basically he's like, I think that poster was his portal out. And lo and behold, it ends up being his portal out, just not in the way that Red is kind of theorized.
I think the movie builds the revelation of the escape so perfectly. The way the warden throws the rock
Oh
at the
my
poster,
gosh.
and then you all of a sudden hear it dancing down and hitting something, and
Oh,
then he reaches through what almost appears to be like the belly button of Raquel
Mm.
Welch, and then the shot of him pulling the poster off in that tunnel shot, fading back. It is so gorgeous.
because like the warden is unhinged at this point. He's screaming like, "Red, you know something." Like, what about Fuzzy Britches over there? Like he's just
Yeah.
unhinged. He's like, "Of course, no one knows anything."
Yeah, and he's like, "Hallelujah, it's a miracle."
That's right. And then you just see this look on his face like, "The fuck." Like he's just mind blown.
Well, and think how flimsy a poster is to cover that
Yeah.
much.
Oh yeah.
You would think it would be like swaying with like wind and suction, but it's, yeah.
Those little details that are in the novella that are so easy to appreciate because they're not in the movie, and they wouldn't make sense in the movie. There's no way to really put those into a screenplay. But the idea of the draft coming in,
Mhm.
and you would think that the cellmate might have peeked a little bit,
Hmm.
might have seen the poster. All these little things, again, it's like this matchstick house that could have just fallen apart at any little thing. But all of these elements, that we've discussed here, and the symbolism involved, and how like for me, like I'm not a Christian.
Mhm.
I'm a certified agnostic. I'm not an atheist, but I'm not a Christian. But I was brought up, and we're all living in a society that's shaped by Judeo-Christian values. So we at least can recognize these things. And also, if we look at all religions through a very objective lens, like at the heart of them, they're all kind of designed to help us appeal to our better natures, our better urges, like the golden rule and forgiveness and generosity, turning the other cheek, redemption, which is a very Christian ideal, like on paper. We don't see it very often, but it's like one of those ideals that we hold up as like this thing we strive for. It's all very aspirational. And unfortunately, as the story also illustrates, it shows all the other competing forces coming at that: the greed, the hate, the corruption, the hypocrisy, that all get in the
Violence.
way. The violence, yes, that get in the way of realizing these things. And of course, the irony being that one of the things getting in the way of that is, say, the warden and his Christian hypocrisy. He sort of
Yeah.
represents the problems of organized religion standing in the way of the realization of the goals of religion, and the stated goals of religion, I should say.
That's interesting because King walks that line a lot,
Mm-hmm.
with the hypocrisy of religion or the fanaticism of religion. He has characters throughout his work. I'm thinking of the mother in the Dead Zone who was just a
Mm.
religious
Oh,
fanatic.
Carrie
Oh,
as well.
Yeah, and Carrie,
Miss
absolutely.
Carmody from The Mist. Miss
Yes.
Carmody.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or
Hmm.
I think The Stand, that's another one
True.
right there too.
Definitely, but he equally sort of indicates at times, at least, that he thinks there's some kind of unifying force or there's some kind of good force out
Mhm.
there,
Yeah.
if you want to think of that as religion. And sometimes he calls it that, and sometimes he doesn't. And he's, at least in my understanding, and tell me if you guys, if you're aware of this too, in my understanding, he's been kind of like unclear about, King has, about his own position or feelings about it. And I think his daughter Naomi is a practitioner of like alternate.
Yeah, she's a Unitarian Universalist,
Yeah.
which is more like, yeah, it's more of a deism, or we acknowledge a spiritualism amongst us, but it just doesn't have a figurehead.
So if Andy is an innocent, why does he have to go through so much terrible stuff?
Mm-hmm.
And why does he even lower himself to engage with, knowingly engage with the fraudulent stuff to get to this place of escape? Because how does that, if you're thinking about him as Jesus, how does that uplift everyone
Well,
else?
that whole story of Jesus, right, of being born as a human, and going through all these human trials, that whole thing of like he died for our sins kind of thing. And I don't mean to say that mockingly and mock people's beliefs, but it is this idea that we were supposed to be redeemed through him and
By
through his
him.
sacrifice. But it was like, it didn't, because what it ultimately paints is, I mean, when you see what was done to him, and how he was tortured, and I
Betrayed and
can't think of a
tortured.
honestly can't think of a worse way to die than being
You're right.
crucified.
I don't know, being stuck in a shit tunnel sounds pretty bad.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we're still giant pieces of shit as a species. I mean, come on, not overall. I mean, we're cool, sure,
Yeah,
but I mean,
we're
no,
good.
it's just like, but I mean, what did it ultimately accomplish?
Right.
That's just the question we always kind of deal with. But I love that King kind of like shows these forces at play and acknowledges a sort of spiritualism. And I love how this whole idea of, if you have in your circle, like your friends, your family, those who truly see us and believe in us, have the power to redeem us. And if we hold on to those things, we can quite possibly find our own personal Zawateneho. And that to me is like the really powerful message here. And one thing that is beautiful about Red's redemption is that he was ready to give up. He saw himself as Brooks. Brooks's death really got in his head probably more than anything, and he just saw himself that way. And one thing we have to mention though is Red's arc as illustrated in the movie through his parole hearings.
Yeah.
And that really shows that final one, because through the whole thing he's like, yep, I'm rehabilitated, yep,
No longer a danger to society. Learn my lesson.
yes sir. And it's all very
Performative.
yeah,
Yeah.
performative. And then you get to the end and he's just like, go ahead and sign your forms and stamp your what have you, Sonny, because I really don't give a shit.
And he challenges the word rehabilitation, right? He says it's a made up word. So men like you can wear fancy suits and have a job. He's like, it's not a real thing. And he talks about his own regret and how he wish he could just get that young version of him and talk some sense into him. He's like, there's not a day that goes by I don't regret it. But like, it's just a very earnest, and you can tell he's ready to be like, stamp the damn form so I can go back out in the yard. Like that's where he's at. Whereas before he's like trying his best to get that approval from the parole board.
What I love though is he didn't care one way or the other if he left or stayed, but what kept him going was his experiences with Andy and knowing that Andy was out there. And also I want to mention too that this is a story that people could rightly criticize in some ways for having zero female characters aside from the one who was murdered in the very beginning.
Incidentally, it does pass the Bechdel test in a very odd way because there's no women. No, I'm just
At all.
there's no women with speaking lines, so they can't talk
You're
to a
right.
man.
Man, I mean, that is the best way. Oh, Chris.
I mean, it does take place largely in a men's prison. Let's acknowledge, but yeah.
We also have to acknowledge the fact that a lot of toxic masculinity is demonstrated through movies that are very male heavy, but also do not demonstrate the sort of unfettered, loving friendship that these two have for one another. It is never questioned. It is simply a story of two men who just fit together and that love each other.
The actors joke that it's male friendship that doesn't involve a car chase. Like that's their joke. Like
yeah, you don't have explosions. Yeah, you do have a prison break, but it's not like a heist. It's not this rough and tumble like, oh
it's not
man,
Ocean's
man.
11 or
Not a war
No.
story.
Exactly.
And the fact that we get to see, because by the end of the novella, we don't get the final outcome. We have Red on the bus and we have him saying, and really the whole point of the story is realized in those final words of saying, I hope, because Red had never hoped before. He learned.
He said hope is a dangerous thing.
Yeah.
It is, especially if you're going to be in jail for 20 years. It's pretty dangerous to hope.
And you can know, like, through everything that King has told us through the entirety of this story, what will probably happen. Of course, I truly believe Red will make it. I don't think that's really in question. I just think that King thought he resolved the story. He resolved the question. He answered the question the story presented. He brought Red to his ultimate arc. But I absolutely adore the fact that Darabont took it just one step further.
He didn't want to.
I know. I know the studio wanted him to.
It's the studio who did it.
But
Darabont wanted the ending ambiguous like King did. Studio wouldn't let him.
I
Hmm.
feel like that final shot, I'm with the studio on this one.
Well, he did it on his terms. It's not a close up. You don't hear them. You're way far removed. You see these two friends off in the
Mhm.
distance walk toward each other. So he didn't want it, but I think he did it in a way that at least maintains some of that purer ending that I think the novella has.
I do love the ending of the novella. I think it's, again, I think people give King a harder time for his endings than he deserves in a lot of ways.
I agree.
This isn't one of them though, right?
No, I don't think so. I don't
Okay.
think so.
I wouldn't think so.
Because I do feel like this has a pitch perfect ending, but every time I see Red walking up that beach and every time I see Andy hopping down from the boat and then I see them embrace from that really high crane shot, I just like well up every time. Like I've seen this
Mhm.
movie dozens of times in my life and it gets me. Last night I'm watching this. It's almost on cue. It's like you just cue it up and I am like, whoop. So
No, it's a great ending. I have nothing against it. I like ambiguous endings. We talked about this with
Yeah.
another Darabont
Mhm.
film. We talked about The Mist, and I like
Yep.
more open-ended endings. But this one still works. Whereas, obviously, if you listen to the Mist episode,
we didn't
we get into
agree.
that.
Especially, I listened to your Mist episode and I agreed that the movie ending worked
Hmm.
for Mist, but especially with short stories, these ambiguous endings. I mean, you don't have 400 pages to completely bring the circle all the way around. And so you have to have a place you're going and a place where you kind of want to indicate, but leave some room. And the ending here definitely does that. Brooks and Red, and I mean, I don't know their exact ages when they get out, but these are much older men. And when Red goes, especially in the novella, to find out if what Andy's left for him is still there, and again, it's all the ifs. What if the rock isn't there? What if it really isn't? He didn't do it. He didn't leave the stuff for me. Like it almost makes me gut sick while I'm waiting to find out still, even though I know what the result's going to be, because it seems like the stakes are so incredibly high with this very short period of time that they might have left to do something different than they've done for the last 20, 25 years. And Brooks didn't make it, right? He didn't necessarily have an Andy, but it's so high stakes to me to see what's going to happen for Red. And in that way, it is totally about Red. What is the outcome for Red?
And the movie's other misdirect is, do you think Red's going to hang himself like Brooks did?
Yeah.
Like that's the other misdirect. You see him, he's in the same job, he's in the same halfway house, he's having the same struggles Brooks did. It totally lays all of that out. And that's what I love that Darabont did with the movie that wasn't in the novella, is he lays all of these stories or scenes to set up two of the biggest misdirects in the movie, which are brilliant and are not in the novella.
He even goes so far as to show him at the base where Brooks hung himself and like he's getting ready to get up with the knife to carve.
Yeah, he gets up. Yeah.
I mean, he takes you that far. And then the most beautiful, like the get busy living or get busy dying is one of my favorite movie lines of all time. But, Red adds is you're goddamn right is, again, I got goosebumps just even saying that. And how he just walks away in this upright, defiant kind of like, fuck this, I am out of here with my suitcase.
But it's only because of Andy. If he hadn't had Andy and he got out, if he didn't have the promise of Zihuatanejo, like that is sort of the beacon of hope that gets him out. Whatever your, like you said, whatever your Zihuatanejo is, like that's the thing that gets you out. Although there's a funny joke where it's like, nobody would have remembered the name of that place. Like Andy said this thing in a story once. And in the movie, he's even like, don't you remember the name of that town? And it's like, dude, you made this guy go to a field in Buxton, find a wall with volcanic glass, tell the mofo the name of the frickin' city again. Like you've already sent him on a side quest. It's
I remember
like,
when
on,
I
man.
first read that story, I didn't know how it was pronounced. It took me, I was looking at this word and just like, what is this?
It's a very beautiful name. Like it just sounds magical. Zihuatanejo.
Oh, that is gorgeous.
And it's on the Pacific coast. The Pacific is an ocean where it has no memory. It's like there's just all of this like allure and shininess to it. Where you're like, this is my redemption. This is where I can start life anew because I can't go back to where I knew. Like you guys said, recidivism. If he went back to what he knew, he'd fall right back in because the system has not set him up to be successful. He has to completely go somewhere different.
And that's an act of will. Like you have to decide,
Yeah, it's a
I'm
big
I'm
step.
not going to go back there. I'm going to choose my redemption and do something new.
The amount of courage that it takes to walk away from what you know and into something you really do not is unbelievable, especially when you're someone Red's age. Because,
Yeah.
again, I mean, if he went into prison when, he was like 18, let's just say 20 years old, I think is thereabouts what he was when he went away, and he was in prison for 40 years. 50, I mean, he's 60 some years old by the
Yeah.
time he's doing this, maybe even older. It's astounding to me what that would probably take to move that needle in that direction for him to just go and leave it all behind and take that risk, take that jump. And it really does often take that one person in your life that believes in you, that sees in you something. And that's what these two had, and we can always think about like, yeah, they probably had a lot of challenges along the way down there. What if the search for Andy is never going to let up?
Yeah.
Red will never be thought of probably. Like he's just an old man who broke parole, but Andy, he busted out. And here's the other thing, and I'll bring this back up too, because in the movie, it's kind of all capped off, right? The warden shoots himself in the head. And in the book, and this is what I love about what Darabont did, is he made the story bigger and darker in a lot of ways, because in the book, like the warden just gets away with it and retires, and he just kind of like goes off into the sunset.
I don't even think Hadley is arrested. Doesn't he just
No, he leaves. Actually,
resign?
Hadley leaves like halfway through the book. He's
That's
gone.
right.
Like,
But
he's
he resigned. It's on his own kind of, he's not hauled off anywhere. Yeah.
yeah, because there was the warden, one of the original wardens that was in there. He was running like that discount auto repair service out of the
Yeah.
prison, and Hadley was
Oh,
part of it. And so he and the other guards that were involved just kind of like got away with it and just
Right.
left. And so it was very like everybody who was bad in the book kind of just got away with it or didn't face any real consequences. And we
maybe
find
Boggs did. I think Boggs
Boggs,
still got
yeah, he did.
Boggs
He,
got
beat within an inch of his life.
he got the
yeah
shit beat out
crippled.
of him, but they made it even more brutal in the movie because
True.
the line of like, word has it he spent the rest of his days drinking his meals through a straw. Like
Yeah.
that was
And he
not
never
in the
walks
book.
again. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas in the book, he does get the shit beat out of him,
That's true.
but he just becomes a
Transferred.
lesser. I don't even know that he's transferred. I think they just said that he was a lesser sister and eventually just faded away. Like he just wasn't even a known
It's almost
quantity.
worse.
Yeah, and so everybody who was bad, pretty much, and Tommy also doesn't get murdered in the book. He gets murdered
Mhm.
in the movie, but beautiful reasoning behind that because you really had to show the warden as the true antagonist. By that point, to kill Andy's hope, they had to kill Tommy to really bring that whole thing home. So Darabont saw every single element that, in the story. He pulled it apart almost like a pleated fan and just, pulled all these pleats apart and just put a little more information in there, and it just made it into this full symphony, and so beautiful and so perfect. And it really is something you can only do, I think, when you are intimately connected to the work. And Darabont has been a student of King's since the very beginning of his career.
About his dollar baby.
Yeah, The Woman in the Room, which is another
Yeah.
story. Well, it's a story in Night Shift.
Yeah.
He made that story as a dollar baby, and King just fell in love with it. Was like the best one, and then yeah, he goes to make this movie, and then The Mist, and honestly hasn't done anything. Well, no, he did Green Mile, and then The Mist, but
Just also a great movie.
yeah, and honestly, I don't know what's going on with Darabont because when you check his IMDb, he has not done anything since 2013, writing, directing, producing. Really nothing since the mid-teens. It's almost like he's just kind of walked away.
And he got
Um,
let go from Walking Dead, right?
Right.
yeah. I think that was really one of
After
his
the
final hurrahs.
one of the
Yeah.
early
Yeah.
seasons, maybe even the first season. Yeah.
Yeah, it was the first
Which was the
season.
best season.
Yeah, so I don't know what's going on with Darabont right now. I hope he's okay. I really feel like despite the quibbles I had over The Mist, I feel like honestly, he's one of the best adapters of Stephen King's work. I think the
Yeah.
only other one right now going is Mike Flanagan.
I mean, the short story is good, but this sits atop of the pile for a lot of reasons. And I think Darabont gets a huge amount of the credit for that.
Yes.
Because Rob Reiner wanted to direct this movie. Rob Reiner was willing to pay somewhere between $2 and $3 million to direct the movie. Remember, he had done Misery and Stand By Me, and did great adaptations. And Darabont decided, you know what, I'm going to turn that down because I actually want to take my own hand at directing it, because he adapted it into the screenplay, as you mentioned. And Reiner had very different choices for the actors. And I don't think it would have worked in the same way. And I think a lot of it was Darabont's decision making and picking the right people.
Do you know by chance any
I
of the
sure
choices?
do. You know, I love looking this stuff up.
Yes, you do.
Kevin Costner was a choice for Red. I know that.
Yeah. So Reiner wanted Tom Cruise as Andy.
Tom Cruise, that's right.
Sorry.
And Harrison
Right?
Ford as Red. So that's who Reiner wanted. Okay.
I could see Harrison Ford as Red.
Tom Hanks was a big choice for Andy, but he was doing Forrest Gump. You mentioned Kevin Costner. He was doing Waterworld. Charlie Sheen was willing to do it on scale. That's actor minimum wage if you don't know. Charlie Sheen was like thirsty for this role. Unfortunately, didn't get it. Johnny Depp, to bring him up again, Nick Cage, Matthew Broderick, and actually
Nick Cage got his own
Nick
prison
Cage.
movie, so it's all good.
Morgan Freeman is actually the one who suggested Tim Robbins for the role of Andy. So he's the one who was like, you know what, this is who you get. Because I guess Darabont had gone around and asked, he got cast first, which by the way, also not the first choice, Morgan Freeman.
Right, was
But he
not.
got cast, and then he's like, hey, who do you think from this list would be great? And he's like, Tim Robbins, always him, like is what he said. And obviously,
Well, and also
brilliant.
because Tim Robbins was perfect because at that point in his career, he was doing some very odd movies like The Hudsucker Proxy and
Mhm.
all these other kind of like
Weird movie.
very weird movies. Like,
Yeah.
and so it really fit. Like Robbins has always been this very enigmatic actor, not in playing this enigmatic character. So it really worked.
Was he doing like the Robert Altman kind of stuff at that time?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, The Player.
Yeah.
Oh my God, great movie. Fantastic movie. But he was one of those guys that just very quirky. Yeah.
Just a few other fun ones. Warden Norton, we could have gotten James Cromwell.
That would have worked. I mean,
would have done
it
okay. I love Bob Gunton, who they ended up picking for the warden. He's honestly amazing. I think this is one though where Cromwell, he can play. I mean, like, what's the one? The big cop movie where he's like the police chief, LA Confidential.
yes.
He
yes.
plays a great asshole in
Hard
that movie.
case. Yeah.
Hard case, yeah.
The prison in which this movie is set, Mansfield Prison in Mansfield, Ohio, is now most of it's closed. You can still go, obviously, and visit the main cell block and an administrative building, and it's a great haunted attraction every October.
Yeah.
I went to it a couple of years ago. It is absolutely worth every penny to go to this thing and be in that building. And I've been in those cell blocks and I've been pulled into those prison cells. I mean, you can look up and just see every aspect of it, and the building just feels like it's haunted. There's a whole Shawshank tour you can go on.
The building is a character in the
Yeah,
story. For sure.
and that building was falling apart when they went to
It's going to be
set up.
demolished. It was set to be demolished.
Yeah, and when they set up shop in that thing, there was a lot of work they had to do to make it even safe to be in, to
Yeah.
be able to shoot the building.
It's beautiful in its own way, like all of the columns and open spaces.
Yeah, and all the brickwork, all the stone and masonry was closed though due to a lot of human rights violations that happened within those walls. Those walls have held a lot of pain and a lot of brutality. And so to set this movie there, it kind of has that same veracity as Session 9, which was filmed in the Danvers State Institution in Massachusetts. And so when you set a movie in a place like this, it really adds to it. And of course, you end up with like this amazing helicopter shot over the main with the Thomas Newman score just playing like as they're introducing the prison, and over the prison yard, over this big sprawling building, over the yard, and it just
The Wire.
and you know you're in it. Like they could not have made this movie on a soundstage. They just
What do you think I mean, obviously, there's the Green Mile as well that we've talked about. What do you think King's fascination with sort of these prison stories is? Why does he set several stories in here?
This is what I saw. Correct me if I'm wrong, Allison, but that he said that it was the culmination of all his memories from watching prison movies when he was a child.
I could
That's
believe
what I
that.
saw.
Interesting.
That makes a lot of sense, and why prison stories in general, right? Because I mean, a big movie for me in my formative years was Escape from Alcatraz with Clint
Mhm.
Eastwood, one of my favorite prison break movies of all time, and just a great movie in general. Highly recommend that one. But and Papillon with Steve McQueen, that's another great one.
I'm kind of a Naked Gun 2.5 guy myself. Best
But
prison break scene ever.
what is a prison movie if not like a you already have a set that is it's a built-in pressure cooker.
Yeah, it's a closed room for sure.
Sorry, correction. I think it was 33 and a third. Sorry, it's had to set the record straight on the Naked Gun
Thank you
trilogy.
so much. I mean, you gotta get those right, Chris.
Got to get it right. Nicole Kidman, or no, Anna Nicole Smith was in it. Come
We're
on.
all about the facts here on Ding Dong Dark this time. But no, I mean, I feel like too, when you're dealing with someone who writes like King, who is all about his characters, it also gives you that opportunity to create very complex and difficult characters because in this pressure cooker are people who are, let's face it, not good guys. And so you have to make them likable in a way that makes you want to root for them or at least to get through the story, even if they are not good guys.
Real quick, can I tell a funny Stephen King story?
Yes.
Okay. So he was saying that he went to a supermarket and this old woman comes up to him and she says, I know who you are. You're that horror writer. I don't read anything you do, but I respect your right to do it. I just like things more genuine, like that Shawshank Redemption. And he's like, I wrote that. And she said, no, you didn't, and walked off and went on her way.
Didn't you mention that like in last week too? Like I think there was
but not
something
as
about
well
this.
as Chris just did. Like
That is part of an article too that I read with that quote, and that to me is just illustrates the quandary of King because
Yeah.
again, people think, oh, horror guy.
Yeah.
And I love what King says here. He says, I'm not interested in horror per se. I'm interested in what people do. What I would like for readers to feel when they read one of my books is I would like for you to fall in love with the characters and want the best in the world for them. In other words, yes, I'm a horror writer. I won't disagree with that, but what I really want to do is engage your positive emotions as much as I can. So when terrible things happen, you don't want to see someone's head come off. And that to me is the essence of good horror or good writing
sure.
in
Yeah.
general.
Yeah.
But you need to build the relationship with the character, whether that is one of love or loathing. You need to have that emotional connection to them. I've brought up the story Needful Things a couple times because I do feel like that is a massive book that King has this brilliant ability that so few authors have, and I certainly do not have this ability, is to create a vast cast of characters. He makes the whole damn town a character and everyone in it, and he can jump from person to person to person and have these distinct voices and distinct personalities and for every one of them, and some of them are the worst people you've ever encountered in your life, and some are the
but
best.
you know them. You always know them.
And that's why, like Needful Things is so great because it appeals to the base nature of everybody. And even the good people have ugly greed and wants that are exploited in a way that is so human. And it makes you look at yourself and go, oh my God, I feel like someone's seeing like my ugliest thoughts and kind of pulling them out of me.
And I think like in my years of reading King, that's probably the thing that has scared me the most is sometimes he'll say something that's so right on and picks right up the ugliness that people have and treat one another with. That actually, I think, is the scariest thread that for me that has always run through his stuff. And it's also the most fascinating. I cannot look away from it. I have to, when he is doing it, I have to engage in it because it is so fascinating to be like, oh, everybody's that way. I don't know if that makes me feel better or worse.
Well, it's like the whole like everybody poops thing, right?
Yeah, right.
It really is like even your hero has that unsavory side because we all do. And what this story does too, I love the subversion because when you think about how popular and beloved this story is, when you talk about a story that is number one on IMDb, running for many years, and that has become legendary among the culture,
Even
and
the lady in the grocery store loves it.
exactly, and what it's about is sympathizing with people in a place that society in general wants to throw people in and forget about them, and they are perfectly fine. If you are in any true crime discussion, whether it's Reddit or Facebook or
Send
Twitter,
them away.
they want nothing more than for these people to not only be thrown away, they want them to be raped, they want them to be assaulted. Prison rape jokes are among the most accepted form of low humor ever. And it's horrific because what that does is it says so much more about you than it does about the person you're saying it about. And then what they do is when you say something about that, they go, oh, so you sympathizing with somebody who murdered a
Yeah.
kid or
Sounds
child
terrible.
molesters or,
Yeah.
whatever. And it's like, I don't need prison to be where the punishment happens. Prison is the punishment. It is you have deprived this person of their liberty as a punishment for their crime. That's the punishment, not to be sent to a place to be beaten, starved, raped, assaulted, humiliated. That is not what we are supposed to send people to prison for. And we have far too many people in this fucking country. I'm sorry, I'm ranting now.
No,
I've
you're
gotten in
no, you're
rant mode
right.
that are more than willing to dehumanize people further. And they also do not think about the fact that the people that are in those prisons that are part of that system have been a part of that system for a fucking reason. In a lot of cases, they come from places that are bred, where crime is born and bred. They never had a chance. And that is not to say I'm excusing what they did, but it
Mhm.
does explain where they came from and what they did. And this story, the fact that people love it so much, it's like, do you know right now that
That you're
you
sympathizing right now?
yes, like please look at that. Look at this story
Yeah.
and then look at how you talk about an inmate and how you want to forget about the millions and millions of people we throw behind bars every year in this country, more than any country in the world, the most incarcerated population in the world. And we don't give a shit about any of them and about fixing any of it. Okay. Whew. Slash rant.
That reminds me when you were talking about when you toured prisons with Bart, your professor, who we both know, it comes down to, and I meant to say it at that time, do you believe there's kind of two philosophies about incarceration, right? It's retribution or it's rehabilitation. And this country, by and large, buys into retribution.
And we need to own up to that.
Well, we do it. This is going to be my rant. We do it entirely inconsistently. We do it inconsistently based on class, race, gender, geography, ethnicity, education, access, all of those things leading to access to defense. All of those things are just wildly inconsistent. I almost don't know if we can do the thing without figuring out how to do it consistently first.
You can't even talk about a crime or a criminal or a convict or a killer or any kind of criminal online in a even remotely sympathetic way without
Yeah,
being painted as a bleeding heart liberal who's soft on crime. And it's like, you know
right.
what? We are all part of the system that creates this thing, these problems. And unless we want to face them head on and address them, I mean, this story to me, and this is why it means so much to me, is because I think it forces people without even thinking about it to have these sympathies. And I really hope that people can examine why. And some people be like, oh, it's just a story, like it's not real life. Like these prisoners are made lovable and whatever. And it's like, no, they're made human, is what they are, because their misdeeds aren't being hidden.
Might I add too? When asked what the movie means to people or what the theme is, Darabont had said in an interview, I think with Charlie Rose, that it's kind of a Rorschach and that everyone sees it differently. So he's like, I can't really tell you what the theme or the point of the movie is because everyone walks up to him on the street or to Morgan or to Tim and they're like, I love this movie for this reason because, and he's like, it's always just humbling and amazing what people say. And so the beauty of this movie is it's not like the theme is just one thing. There's a lot of stuff you can attach to it. And I think to your points, like part of it is maybe we need to think more about why it matters to us. What is that connection piece and what are the consistencies there? And, you know, maybe it forces people to think, what's that quote? Like a measure of society or a culture is how well you treat your most vulnerable
Mm-hmm.
people
Yeah.
in your society. And you know, I think this is kind of a window into that. And sure, these are painted as very nice guys, even though we know they've done crimes, with the exception of a few bad eggs. Like everyone in that gang is like a nice guy, even though they did a crime. But nevertheless, I think the point is it kind of shows the humanity. You don't lose it when you go in there, even though we do send people into this dehumanizing place.
Yeah.
And the great thing about Andy Dufresne's characters, somehow he has that firewall. He doesn't let that come in. And to the extent that he lifts up Red in a way that Red never even anticipated. And I know you all were talking about like the Christian allegory. You can look at this from a very agnostic viewpoint as well, which is to
Yes.
say, Kate, you asked earlier, why did Andy do all this stuff? And part of it is to feel alive, to feel like he had some matter and some existence, even if he was doing a crime in some of these cases. I think he did it with the end goal in mind. Like it was sort of a long con on his part. I don't think he just did the defrauding to do it, but I feel like, yeah, you can look at all of the movie elements that are about the Christian allegory. It's all there. But to me, it's also just the fact of like, from a completely just non-religious viewpoint, it's finding a way to make it through. And if you're in the prison in the real world, is to not be in prison in your mind. And I think that's
Yeah,
kind of
to have
where
some purpose, to feel of use.
to maintain your humanity.
And isn't that kind of the beauty of it? Like, if we really talk about the Christian allegory and how it mimics just general humanism, secular humanism, and how there is a bridge to be united there, and how hard that, how much harder that's gotten in a lot of ways. And it's like, we have the same goals here, guys. It's like, we just choose to not always believe in the deity. You know, if anybody says something like, what makes you be a good person if you don't believe in God, or you're not afraid to go to hell, or, you know, what keeps you on the straight and narrow? And it's like, because that's human nature.
Yeah,
Like
what
there's a
makes you think I don't have a moral code?
like a moral code is not dependent on your belief in a God. If anything, the God just might help reinforce it for you, but that was already there. You're taught that through a series of events as you're growing up, hopefully in the right environment that teaches
Right.
you that bad behavior does not get you reward. Therefore, reward come from good place. I mean, you could really simplify it down to something very simple as behavioral psychology, but the aspect of like, I don't want to kill people because, well, that would feel really bad, and I don't want to be killed, so why would I kill someone? It's just as simple as that, guys. It isn't like Jesus tells me it's bad, so I don't kill. Like that's not why.
Just very basic humanism, very basic humanity. When I was in law school, he was my torts professor, and torts is personal injury. So he also happened to have been, before he became a lawyer and a professor, a guard at San Quentin.
Oh wow.
And I wish he had taught criminal law, but he taught torts. And his great story that he told us, he was like, before any of you think that you are better than any one of the people that was incarcerated at San Quentin, let me tell you, you are not. It is one step or one collection of generational, experience away from being in the exact same position. And he was like, and when you were a guard, you better have treated people well, because the upper floor would just collect stuff in their pee buckets
Yeah.
and dump them on the guards. It's just like a very visceral way of, don't be thinking that you are any better or different.
I am so glad that you brought that up, Kate, because that's another thing Bart and I, as we've been sort of planning this season of prison that we hope to do, is talking about how and he said almost that exact thing verbatim, is that we are all so very close. We are one action away from being that person behind those bars. And it doesn't necessarily have to be from something you directly did, as Andy Dufresne demonstrates, and so many people who are incarcerated for one bad decision, that one too many drink that you took, that one stupid little action that you didn't think was meaningful, is the butterfly flapping its wings. And once you were in that system, you were changed in the eyes of society. Good luck getting outside that again. Like I said, I yearned for a career in forensic psychology for a very long time. And when
Your
I,
lost career.
yeah, I mean, that is the probably the reason, like, I just didn't want to go and finish school. So I became a writer, and now I'm doing a podcast, and I'm just a enthusiast is what I am. I'm not an expert, and I'm not a doctor, and I never will be. But visiting those prisons with Bart, and then reading this book as a teenager when I was at the very threshold of just trying to figure out life. I was 15, 16 years old. That was really the age where I finally rejected the religion I was raised with, and let go of the fear of that, and figuring out my values and all that. But it ended up becoming, I think, one of the most important touchstones of my value system in my life is this story. And this is why I tell people that if you really want to know who I am at my core, you need to read this book and you need to watch this movie. This is who I am right here. This is it. This is me. And there are very few stories that have done that for me personally. And I feel like it's done that for a lot of people. And that's why it's such an important story for so many people. So,
I mean, I would say, just to reiterate my feeling about it in general, is I've sat in the Denver District Court, in the Denver District Criminal Court, and I've watched people do their first appearances. And it's a distinct difference based on access. And, I have my education, but others don't. It's not an inherently meaningful thing. It just means that I can spot how lacking in access some people are. The language that's used, the written language that's used, the speed with which things happen, that can land you in a place that someone else just wouldn't.
I know we're getting into a lot of societal things and we're kind of moving away from this story, but this is just such a important thing. And anybody's listening to this right now, I think if you love the Shawshank Redemption, you love it for a reason. And I feel like it's probably because it speaks to something that we're touching on, all of us. This whole thing is not perhaps like the darkest in terms of like creepy, scary. There's a lot of tragedy. There's a lot of sadness. At the same time, a lot of hope and a lot of redemption. And as Chris and I have talked about a million times, it's, we'll go in trying to talk about something dark, but then we end up kind of exposing it in some way and showing it's not as dark. But I feel like you can't really examine darkness without the light. And so that's why this show exists.
Which, by the way, the episode that you did about the dance craze,
yeah,
just dance themselves, that was dark.
Yeah.
That freaked me out.
No, choreomania, man. You gotta love it.
I mean, I guess it's light and fun to dance, but man, that got dark, like days and weeks of dancing themselves to death. That was crazy.
That's the premise for the movie Footloose, why they can't dance in that town, right? True story.
It makes you crazy.
That's it. That's why they ban dancing.
That's why they ban dancing, everybody. Mass hysteria.
Dogs and cats living together. Mass hysteria. Is anybody have anything else to add before we wrap this baby up? Because I know we've chatted for a bit.
Do we need to tell the listeners who was also considered for some of the other roles, or are we just going to leave them hanging?
No. Okay, do it. All right, Chris, do it.
And on a little bit of a palate cleanser. So Red, Gene Hackman, Robert Duvall, Paul Newman, Robert Redford, which would have been great. Redford, Clint Eastwood. But Darabont said he wanted somebody who had the gravitas of the narration, because the narration is such an important part of the story. He actually considered Sidney Poitier, who passed on it. He said he didn't want to be basically represented as a prisoner, which I get, for representation reasons. I totally understand. And let's see, who else did we not cover? For Tommy, Brad Pitt. but he got the lead role for Interview with the Vampire. So he's like, deuces.
Okay, that was a good choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
James Gandolfini as Boggs. That's interesting. That's very interesting.
I can't see that at all. That's a no. I think I can't remember the actor's name. All of a sudden, he's just a great character actor.
Mark Rolston.
Yeah, such a wonderful character
Mark
actor.
Rolston, aka Space Marine,
Yep.
in the movie Aliens.
Yeah, he's wonderful, and I think I loved with him. He's tough, but he has that little bit of a kind of the feminine but threatening feminine edge
Right.
to him. Oh, he was perfect.
I don't think Gandolfini could pull that off. Like, it just, yeah.
He's too brute. He's too much of a brute. He's Rooster. He's not Boggs.
Oh yeah.
He could have been the warden.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. We talked about most of them. I had to make sure our listeners got that last bit of, not that you can't go look this up, but
if you're coming here for the full treatment of both the story of the movie plus
the light and the dark,
also, the criminal justice system and the prison industrial complex. I mean, we're going to talk about it all. We're covering every single base. And I did warn people that I would get a little controversial in this episode.
Also a deep dive into the problems of our justice system. Yes.
And as a philosopher once said, Florence, it's always darkest before the dawn.
Oh, it's funny. I was actually just listening to the new Florence and the Machine album that just came out, and there's a song on it called Choreomania, which is pretty fantastic.
No kidding.
Yeah, really? Yeah. Highly recommend that album.
I need to listen to it.
It's great. So that pretty much concludes our exploration of the Shawshank Redemption and really different seasons. I'm so glad to have had the three of us cover these two stories, both The Body. Please go and listen to that if you haven't. And if you're not listening to the show in perfect chronological order like I do with every podcast I love, then I don't know what to tell you, but go back and listen to it if you're just one of those people that weirdly roll the dice.
Weirdly, some of us are non-linear, madam. How
Listen,
dare you cast
I am a
judgment?
shamefully linear individual. I am not proud of it.
But what's funny, Allison, is our discussions are always so like all over the map. It's funny that you say you're such a linear person, because our discussions are always like, wait, how do we get seven points removed from where we were? Oh yeah, that's just how we kind of went.
This was like the danger of me even doing a podcast, because we've always been this way. When Chris and I get on the phone to chat about something, like, we're going to talk real quick. At 4 hours later, we're still talking. But I feel like that's sometimes how we get at the ideas. When I verbalize, I tend to go a little, I'm more like a shotgun than I am a rifle. Yeah. So when I am writing and trying to really keep my thoughts organized, that's when I do the linear, because my tendency to verbally spray everywhere exists inside my brain very much so. But if I'm going to accomplish anything, I have to go A to B, B to C, C to D. Otherwise, it doesn't get done. That's just a little insight into the machinations of my messed up head. And if you want more of those machinations inside my messed up head, hop on over to season 1, check out all our discussions there, listen to the rest of these, and please stick
learn
around.
About choreomania, learn about mass hysteria and dance.
Learn about the Devil's Interval, learn about Lucifer at the Denver airport. Shout out to Denver.
We love Lucifer here in Denver.
Yeah, exactly. He is a legend, an absolute legend. I love
the Ryong Hotel, the terrifying hotel.
Oh my God. Yeah. There's so many good things. And coming up, season 3 is going to be cults, you guys.
Nice.
Oh, you're dropping it now.
I'm dropping it now. I'm testing to see who's listening. If you are listening right now, then you're getting that information a little early. We're not even quite done with this season yet. We got a few more episodes of King to go, but I'm dropping it now because I reward people who pay attention. But if you love what you're hearing, feel free to go over to Apple and give me a review on Apple Podcasts, and send me some hate mail.
You can also rate on Spotify now, so if you can give a little rating on Spotify too.
And while you're rating me, go over and rate Chris and Ben on 80s High. It is a fantastic show. I promote it all the time for a good reason. I would not have Chris on the show if I didn't love the work that he did. And obviously, Chris wouldn't be my best friend if I didn't love the work that he did, because he's just that kind of guy. He's just a really smart and awesome guy.
I'm actually defrauding Allison, and so I'm keeping her in check. She has to say that. Otherwise, we're gonna.
I'm still waiting for the check to clear.
It's a prisoner's dilemma. We'll both go to jail if you reveal the arrangement.
And Kate, now you are just doing such amazing work in the legal realm, and you're just such a dear friend, and you are just kicking ass and taking names. Do you want people to find you on social media? You're not a lot on there though. I mean, you're like an enigma yourself. So
I'm like moderately on
yeah.
social media, but I would say we talked about a lot of different documentaries and podcasts and some books. And you mentioned Bart, and he's got some stuff out there. Maybe in the show notes, you could put some of those links or names, because a lot of that stuff, if people want to check out, if they're interested in the social justice aspect of it, or if they're interested in just some of the other entertainment stuff, that would be cool.
I want you back for more episodes. We want you back. Chris and I have agreed. We've agreed that you're coming back. So you're coming back.
I can scam you too. So you have to be in more episodes. How about that? I'm running a whole little crime ring here.
Oh,
how will you take us in on that?
This is Chris's attempt at being a multi-level marketing guy.
That's right. Speaking of cults, that's right.
All right, you guys, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back for next week. In the meantime, sayonara. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hope springs eternal.
See you in Swatanejo.
Ding Dong Darkness Time has been brought to you and produced by yours truly, Allison Dixon. It was made possible by an array of amazing co-hosts, friends, family, but especially you, the listeners. Big shouts also go out to the brilliant Nathaniel Dixon for the show art and future legend Spencer Morlock for all the music. I'll be back again soon with another episode. In the meantime, be good, you little ding-dongs.